In the heart of the bustling modern city of Fairhaven, a seemingly ordinary park lay nestled among high-rise buildings and busy streets. This park, known as Maplewood Park, was a favorite spot for joggers, families, and children playing on the swings. Unbeknownst to the city's residents, beneath the surface of the park lay a dark and forgotten history. Centuries ago, long before the skyscrapers and concrete roads, the land was home to a small village called Ravensbrook. It was in Ravensbrook that a powerful witch named Morgana lived. Feared by the superstitious villagers for her extraordinary abilities and accused of dark sorcery, Morgana was ultimately condemned to death. As the villagers gathered around a hastily constructed pyre, their faces twisted with fear and hatred, Morgana stood defiantly in the center. Flames licked at the wooden stakes, and as the fire roared to life, Morgana's voice cut through the crackling inferno, uttering a curse that would echo through the centuries. By the flames that consume me, I curse you and your descendants. My wrath shall be eternal, and I will return to bring darkness upon those who condemned me. As her body was engulfed by the flames, the villagers felt a chill despite the blazing heat. Morgana's death was supposed to mark the end of their fears, but it only planted the seeds of something far more sinister. Centuries passed, and Ravensbrook faded into obscurity. The village was eventually abandoned, and its lands were incorporated into the growing city of Fairhaven. Maplewood Park was established on the site where Morgana had met her fiery end, the memory of her curse buried beneath layers of progress and urban development. On a cold, moonless night in modern Fairhaven, an ominous change began to take place. The air grew heavy with an unnatural stillness, and the usual hum of city life seemed to quiet. In the center of Maplewood Park stood an ancient, gnarled tree, its twisted branches reaching skyward like skeletal fingers. At the stroke of midnight, the ground around the tree began to tremble. The tree itself seemed to pulse with dark energy, its bark cracking and splitting as if something within was struggling to break free. From the fissures in the tree trunk, a dark, swirling mist began to seep out, filling the air with an acrid, sulfurous scent. The mist coalesced, taking on a humanoid form. From the shadows emerged Morgana, her eyes glowing with malevolent power, her presence casting an eerie glow on the deserted park. Clad in tattered robes, her ethereal form was both terrifying and mesmerizing. Her voice, now a whisper on the wind, carried an echo of the curse she had uttered so long ago. The time has come. My revenge begins. As Morgana surveyed the city that had replaced her village, a malicious smile spread across her face. Her return heralded the unleashing of dark magic upon Fairhaven, and she was determined to make the descendants of her persecutors pay for the centuries of suffering she had endured. The first sign of her return manifested in the form of a plague of crows. They descended upon the city in an unrelenting swarm, their numbers blotting out the moonlit sky. Their ominous cawing echoed through the streets, and their sharp beaks and talons brought fear and injury to anyone who ventured outside. Panic spread quickly as the birds attacked without provocation, targeting people with a seemingly intelligent malice. Within days, the city was thrown into chaos. Power outages struck randomly, plunging neighborhoods into darkness. Fires broke out in various parts of the city, their origins mysterious and untraceable. Violent crime surged as the atmosphere of fear and tension grew thicker. The authorities were baffled, and the city's residents were gripped by an escalating sense of dread. Amid the turmoil, a pattern began to emerge. The victims of these strange occurrences seemed to share a common ancestry, tracing back to the original villagers of Ravensbrook. Among these descendants were the city's leaders, business moguls, and influential figures, all oblivious to the ancient curse that now threatened their lives. Detective Laura Thompson, a sharp and dedicated investigator with a keen eye for detail, was called in to handle the growing crisis. As she pored over reports and historical records, she stumbled upon the legend of Morgana. The more she read, the more she realized that the witch's curse was not a mere folktale, but a very real and imminent threat. The revelation sent chills down her spine, but it also steeled her resolve. Determined to protect her family and the city she loved, Laura knew she had to delve deeper into the dark history of Fairhaven to find a way to stop Morgana's revenge. As Laura began her investigation, she could feel the weight of Morgana's malevolent gaze upon her. The witch's power was growing stronger each day, and the clock was ticking. The stage was set for a battle between the living and the undead, between the modern world and ancient dark magic. The residents of Fairhaven were about to learn that some curses are not so easily forgotten, and that the past can reach out with deadly intent to reclaim its hold on the present. Detective Laura Thompson sat in her dimly lit office, surrounded by piles of historical documents and crime reports. Her brow was furrowed in concentration as she traced the lineage of recent victims back to the ancient village of Ravensbrook. The deeper she delved, the more apparent it became that the incidents plaguing Fairhaven were not random but meticulously targeted. Her investigation had uncovered the grim tale of Morgana, the powerful witch condemned to death centuries ago. The legend described how Morgana, with her dying breath, cursed the descendants of those who had wronged her. Laura's gut told her that this ancient curse was now coming to fruition, and the city's current turmoil was no coincidence. Determined to uncover more, Laura sought out Professor James Harlow, an expert in folklore and the occult. Harlow, a scholarly man with a passion for unraveling ancient mysteries, was initially skeptical when Laura recounted the recent events and her theories about Morgana's curse. However, the mounting evidence and the bizarre occurrences in the city soon convinced him that there was something supernatural afoot. Together they pored over ancient texts and folklore, seeking any clue that could help them combat Morgana's dark magic. One night, while examining a particularly old and fragile manuscript, Harlow found a reference to a ritual that could potentially bind a spirit as powerful as Morgana's. The ritual required rare ingredients and specific conditions, including the use of a special amulet believed to be buried somewhere in Fairhaven. As Laura and Harlow embarked on their quest to gather the necessary items, Morgana's attacks grew bolder. She manipulated the minds of influential city figures, turning them into her unwitting pawns. One by one, city council members, business moguls, and law enforcement officials began to enact policies that spread fear and chaos, making the city more susceptible to Morgana's influence. Laura's family became a target. Her younger brother, Michael, a journalist, began to receive disturbing threats. Her parents' home was vandalized, and strange, unexplainable accidents started happening to those close to her. The sense of urgency intensified. Laura and Harlow had to act quickly to protect not only their loved ones, but the entire city. Their search for the amulet led them to the city's historical archives, where they uncovered an old map of Fairhaven. The map revealed the original layout of Ravensbrück, and through painstaking research, they identified the likely location of the amulet beneath the old church that once stood at the village's center. The church had long since been demolished, replaced by a modern shopping complex. Laura and Harlow planned a covert operation to access the underground remnants of the church. Late one night, they broke into the shopping complex, using the map to navigate through the labyrinthine basement. They found a sealed-off passage that led to a forgotten crypt. The air was thick with dust and the oppressive weight of history. As they ventured deeper, their flashlights illuminated ancient symbols and inscriptions on the walls. Finally, they reached a small hidden chamber. In the center, on a stone pedestal, lay the amulet, a beautifully crafted piece with intricate designs that seemed to pulse with a faint, otherworldly light. As Laura reached out to take it, a sudden chill filled the chamber. Morgana's presence was palpable, a dark shadow that seemed to wrap around them. With the amulet in hand, Laura and Harlow hurriedly made their way back to the surface, feeling the oppressive weight of Morgana's gaze upon them. They knew they had only a small window of time to perform the ritual before Morgana's power became too great to contain. Back at Harlow's office, they prepared the ritual with meticulous care. The ingredients were rare and had to be combined in a precise order. As they worked, the room seemed to darken, and a sense of foreboding settled over them. Morgana was aware of their actions and was determined to stop them. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. The temperature dropped, and an icy wind whipped through the office. Laura and Harlow felt a malevolent presence growing stronger. Shadows in the corners of the room seemed to move of their own accord, and a whispering chant filled the air. Morgana's spirit materialized, her form more solid and terrifying than ever. Her eyes burned with rage as she realized what they were attempting to do. She unleashed a torrent of dark energy, knocking over books and shattering glass. Laura and Harlow stood their ground, chanting the incantations they had meticulously memorized. As Morgana advanced, her power clashing against the protective barrier of the ritual, Laura felt a surge of determination. She couldn't let Morgana's curse destroy everything she loved. With a final desperate push, they completed the ritual. The amulet glowed brightly, emitting a powerful light that enveloped Morgana. Morgana screamed, her voice filled with centuries of anguish and fury. The light intensified, and her form began to disintegrate, pulled back into the ethereal plane from which she had emerged. With one last vengeful glare, she vanished, leaving the room in a deafening silence. The lights flickered back on, and the temperature returned to normal. Laura and Harlow stood amidst the wreckage, their breathing heavy but their spirits unbroken. They had succeeded in binding Morgana, but they knew it was only a temporary victory. The witch's power had been diminished, but her presence still lingered, a dark shadow waiting for another opportunity to strike. Exhausted but resolute, Laura vowed to protect her city and her family from any future threats. She and Harlow continued to study the ancient texts, determined to find a way to permanently banish Morgana's spirit. They knew the battle was far from over, but they were prepared to face whatever darkness lay ahead. The city of Fairhaven had been temporarily calmed, but the atmosphere remained tense. Despite their initial success in binding Morgana's spirit, Detective Laura Thompson and Professor James Harlow knew that their struggle was far from over. the witch's influence continued to seep into the city's fabric, manifesting in subtle yet insidious ways. Shadows lingered longer than they should, and whispers of fear and paranoia spread among the residents. Laura and Harlow had little time to recuperate before they realized Morgana was rallying her strength for a final devastating strike. Reports of strange occurrences surged, people disappearing without a trace, inexplicable fires erupting, and a palpable sense of dread permeating the air. Morgana was not defeated. She was preparing for a confrontation that would either cement her return or end her vengeful rampage once and for all. The pair knew they had to act decisively. Laura, armed with her police training and an indomitable will, and Harlow, with his vast knowledge of the occult, prepared for the inevitable showdown. They decided to return to the epicenter of Morgana's curse, the park where the ancient tree stood, the very site where she had been burned centuries ago. On a moonless night, they gathered the final components needed for a more powerful ritual. This time, the ritual was designed not just to bind Morgana, but to permanently banish her spirit. They collected items of significant power: the amulet from the church crypt, ancient runes inscribed on parchment, and a vial of water from a consecrated spring. Each item carried the weight of history and hope, necessary for their final stand against the witch. As they approached Maplewood Park, an unnatural chill enveloped them. The park, usually a place of solace and relaxation, had transformed into a realm of foreboding darkness. The ancient tree stood like a sentinel, its twisted branches reaching out as if ready to ensnare them. The ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse with dark energy, and the air was thick with the scent of sulfur and decay. Laura and Harlow set up their ritual site at the base of the tree. They drew a protective circle with salt and placed candles at each cardinal point. The amulet was positioned at the center, glowing faintly with its own inner light. Harlow began chanting the incantations, his voice steady and strong despite the rising tension. Suddenly, the ground shook violently, and the sky darkened even further. Morgana's presence was unmistakable. She materialized before them, her form more solid and terrifying than ever. Her eyes glowed with a malevolent fire, and her voice echoed with centuries of hatred. "You dare to challenge me again? You think your pitiful rituals can banish me? I will make you suffer, as I have suffered." With a wave of her hand, Morgana unleashed a torrent of dark energy. Shadows writhed and took shape around her, forming monstrous creatures that lunged at Laura and Harlow. Laura drew her gun, firing at the apparitions, but her bullets passed through them harmlessly. The shadows were not physical beings. They were manifestations of Morgana's rage and power. Harlow continued his chants, his voice unwavering. The protective circle glowed brightly, repelling the shadowy creatures that clawed at its edges. Laura, inside the circle, felt a surge of determination. She knew she had to protect Harlow while he completed the ritual. Morgana's attacks grew fiercer. She summoned gusts of wind that extinguished their candles and tried to breach the protective circle. Laura, realizing they needed more time, reached into her bag and pulled out the consecrated water. She splashed it on the ground outside the circle, creating a barrier that Morgana's dark magic could not cross. Enraged, Morgana screamed and intensified her assault. The shadows coalesced into a massive, writhing form that crashed against the protective barrier, causing it to flicker and waver, Laura and Harlow were pushed to their limits, their every ounce of strength and willpower focused on maintaining the ritual. As the struggle reached its climax, Harlow's voice rose above the chaos, chanting the final incantation. The amulet at the center of the circle flared with a brilliant light, its power merging with the protective circle. The ground trembled violently, and the air crackled with energy. Morgana's form began to waver, her screams filling the night as the ritual took hold. The light from the amulet intensified, engulfing Morgana in a blinding radiance. Laura watched in awe and terror as the witch's form was pulled apart, her dark essence dissipating into the ether. With a final defiant scream, Morgana vanished, her power broken by the combined strength of the ritual and the amulet. The night fell silent, and the oppressive darkness lifted. The ancient tree, once a conduit of Morgana's power, stood lifeless and barren. Laura and Harlow, exhausted but triumphant, collapsed to the ground. They had succeeded in their mission, but they knew the battle had taken its toll. The city of Fairhaven was safe, but the scars of the conflict would remain. As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave the park, Laura felt a sense of relief mixed with lingering unease. Morgana's curse had been lifted, but the memory of her malevolence would never be forgotten. The city had faced its darkest hour and emerged victorious, thanks to the bravery and determination of those who stood against the darkness. In the aftermath, Laura and Harlow returned to their lives, forever changed by their ordeal. Laura continued her work as a detective, her experiences giving her a newfound perspective on the unseen forces that could threaten the city. Harlow resumed his studies, his knowledge of the occult deepened by their confrontation with Morgana. Together they remained vigilant, ready to face any future threats that might arise. The memory of Morgana's revenge served as a reminder that the past could always reach out to the present, and that courage and determination were the keys to overcoming even the darkest of evils. The sun rose over Fairhaven, casting a warm golden glow across the city, a stark contrast to the harrowing events of the previous night. The city was slowly returning to normalcy, though the scars of Morgana's reign of terror were still fresh. Detective Laura Thompson and Professor James Harlow stood at the edge of Maplewood Park, the site of their final confrontation with the ancient witch. The ancient tree that had once pulsed with dark energy now stood lifeless, its bark charred and twisted, a grim reminder of the battle that had taken place. The media buzzed with stories of the strange events, though most explanations were grounded in natural disasters or isolated criminal activities. Few knew the true story of Morgana's revenge, and even fewer believed it. Laura and Harlow understood that while the city might heal, the memories of those haunted nights would linger for a long time. Laura returned to her role as a detective, but she was changed. The supernatural encounter had opened her eyes to a world beyond the physical. She became more attuned to the subtle signs of dark forces at play, her investigative skills now paired with an acute awareness of the occult. Her colleagues noticed her newfound intensity, but only those closest to her knew the true reason behind it. Her family, particularly her younger brother Michael, remained deeply affected by the events. Michael, a journalist who had often pursued stories of the unexplained, now had first-hand experience with the supernatural. His articles took on a more serious tone, and he worked tirelessly to uncover other hidden truths within the city, always mindful of the ancient curse that had nearly destroyed them. Professor Harlow, meanwhile, resumed his academic pursuits, but his studies now carried a personal weight. He continued to delve into ancient texts and occult practices, determined to understand the full extent of the powers they had faced. Harlow and Laura maintained their partnership, regularly consulting on strange cases that hinted at supernatural involvement. Their bond, forged in the crucible of battling Morgana, became a cornerstone of their efforts to protect Fairhaven. Despite their vigilance, Morgana's lingering presence was felt in subtle ways. Odd occurrences continued to be reported, shadows moving unnaturally, whispers in the wind, and fleeting glimpses of ghostly figures. Laura and Harlow knew that while Morgana had been banished, the dark energy she had unleashed could never be fully eradicated. The city needed constant watchfulness, and they were ready to provide it. A month after the climactic battle, a memorial was erected in Maplewood Park. It stood where the ancient tree had been, a simple stone marker inscribed with the words, "In memory of those lost, and in gratitude to those who protect us from unseen dangers." The marker became a place of quiet reflection, a reminder of the cost of ignorance and the importance of remembering the past. Fairhaven began to rebuild, its residents slowly recovering from the terror that had gripped them. The community came together, driven by a newfound sense of unity and resilience. Stories of bravery during the dark days circulated, and while many chose to attribute the events to natural causes, a few whispered of the ancient curse and the brave souls who had faced it. Laura's daily routine now included visits to the memorial, where she would stand in quiet contemplation. These moments allowed her to center herself, drawing strength from the memory of their victory and the determination to prevent future threats. She took on new cases with a renewed sense of purpose, always mindful of the thin veil separating the ordinary from the extraordinary. One evening, as Laura and Harlow sat in his office, poring over an old manuscript, they discussed the future. They knew that Morgana's defeat was just one battle in an ongoing war against the forces of darkness. Their encounter had been a stark reminder that evil, no matter how ancient or buried, could always resurface. "We faced one of the darkest evils," Harlow said, his voice steady. "But we must remain vigilant. There are always more shadows waiting to emerge." Laura nodded, her resolve unwavering. "We'll be ready," she replied. "Fairhaven is our home, and we'll protect it, no matter what." As they continued their work, the sense of foreboding gradually lifted, replaced by a shared determination to safeguard their city. They knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but they were not alone. Their experiences had forged a network of allies, other researchers, local officials, and even ordinary citizens who had been touched by the supernatural events. Together, they formed a quiet but formidable resistance against the unseen forces that threatened their world. In the months that followed, Laura and Harlow faced new challenges, each more complex than the last. They unraveled mysteries involving ancient relics, spectral apparitions, and curses long forgotten. Each case brought them closer to understanding the delicate balance between the mundane and the mystical, and each victory strengthened their resolve. Fairhaven's story, intertwined with the legends of Morgana and the heroes who rose against her, became a part of the city's lore. Tales of the witch and her curse were passed down through generations, serving as both a cautionary tale and a testament to the power of courage and unity. Laura and Harlow's partnership born out of necessity and forged in the fires of battle, became legendary. They remained the city's guardians, their vigilance ensuring that Fairhaven would never again fall prey to the darkness. And though Morgana's spirit had been banished, the lessons learned and the bonds formed in the face of her wrath would endure, a beacon of hope against any future shadows that might rise. In the end, Fairhaven emerged not just as a city that had faced a terrible evil, but as a community strengthened by its trials. The legacy of Morgana's revenge and the heroes who thwarted it served as a reminder that, even in the darkest of times, the light of courage and resilience would always shine through.